Schiff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I share the concerns that many have raised about the potential liability to water and wastewater systems that are passive recipients of PFAS and have played no role in that PFAS pollution, but could be on the hook for compensation for cleanup. At the same time, there have been some concerns raised about blanket exclusions and whether that sets a precedent that could lead to more blanket exclusions, or that it might impede cleanup efforts in which water systems are provided resources to help with the cleanup process. So two questions. One, Ms. Bowers, can you articulate any concerns over a blanket exclusion of passive recipients? And Ms. Pilconis and Mr. Gerstenberg, if you could comment on what about an approach that would codify the EPA's policy of shielding de minimis entities from third-party litigation if they're acting in good faith? Would the current policy expressed during the prior administration of not enforcing these actions, if codified, would that provide sufficient protection for these passive recipients?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The question of whether a liability exemption under CERCLA statute would have unacceptable effects, or by contrast, whether the level of risk remaining to passive receivers absent an exemption would be unacceptable, requires some policy balancing that I'm not really able to speak to. What I can say is that to date, Congress has not enacted a liability exemption that would apply with respect to a specific substance. The liability exemptions that Congress has enacted have applied to categories of parties, types of activity, but they have not been chemical specific in the way that an exemption for PFAS liability would be. I also noted in response to an earlier question that there may be some consideration around potentially reducing the overall number of parties that would be liable under CERCLA and that would be available to pay for all or a portion of response costs. Again, that's a policy balancing that would be for Congress to decide.
Okay, thank you.
Right. PFAS is very different. It's ubiquitous. It's already in groundwater, already in soil, consumer products, building materials. The contamination is largely historic. We're not talking about a spill. It's invisible. You can't smell it. You can't see it. It's unavoidable. Contractors work across, as I said, hundreds of sites, using hundreds of landfills, reusing materials over decades. CERCLA was not intended for chemicals this widespread, or this persistent, or this impossible to avoid. And for other chemicals, we have clear standards. We have clear background levels, concentration limits telling us what are restricted versus unrestricted use, and disposal guidelines and requirements. We don't have that for PFAS.
And is that a problem with the fact that the regulatory agencies haven't moved quickly enough to provide those kind of limits for PFAS? Is it, I know there are certain types of PFAS that are more difficult to measure and maybe the science isn't there yet, but is that a problem with regulatory inaction or something unique to PFAS?
It's a big problem that we have designated two of the most ubiquitous PFAS chemicals as hazardous substances under CERCLA, which is attaching that strict joint and several retroactive liability to anyone that has touched it when we don't have any standards to manage it.
Mr. Gerstenberg,
Thank you, Senator.
What would you think of an approach that codifies the regulatory discretionary policies expressed previously?
Yes, so first, I'd like to reiterate, Senator, that we believe there has been enough science accomplished to be able to put out standards for regulatory cleanup and thresholds around that can be enacted on. And those need to be put in place the sooner the better. Once those are in place, we can make sure that we protect passive receivers of the materials and focus on the polluters of PFAS. We just think that those standards need to be put in place so people can act.
Do you have any view about the relative merits of a blanket exemption versus codifying the policy of the previous administration not to go after de minimis and
Yes, I think that, that there should be exemptions around de minimis amounts of PFAS, and that passive receivers should be protected from liability.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.